I teared up multiple times with this one client that I'm talking about because I'm feeling them feel those things.
I had this belief that the only way that I could show emotions is if I was able to control the emotions at the time.
And there's one other area, and this whole thing that we're talking about is also a leadership skill. Like without this piece, it's very, very hard to lead. He was saying, and he teared up and he paused. And here's my reaction to this. I look at him, and first of all, what I felt was actually the same thing that he felt. I recognized it, but I stopped that. My reaction to that is I looked back, I looked around to see people leaving. Who's leaving? Like that was my perception of like my perception of myself and other leaders, that you're it's not okay to share emotions. That was and that perception kind of drove a lot of what I did for a while. Another, and I'll share one more moment personally, another story where and this happened regularly in my personal life, where I would pretty much in the beginning stages of my marriage with my wife, pretty much every month we would have a blow up. And in my mind, it was like everybody else, but my wife would tell me, like, you know, every time you go to your family's place and something like this happens, you'd come back and this happens. I don't think this is related to us. I'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm a very rational person. Yet I'm blowing up every time. And that kind of helped me understand, like, okay, so one, I have this view of emotions to begin with that's based on this belief that you have to be a certain way as a leader, as a human being. And two, I'm in a complete denial of what's actually happening. And then those were like the beginning stages of me becoming aware of, okay, what's happening? Like it's something to work on. And so it started with self-awareness, and we'll talk about all four areas: self-awareness of like what, and part of your self-awareness being aware of the reality of emotions. It's a fact of life. It's a biological process, not even a mental process. Then we're going to talk a little bit about self-regulation. What does that mean? What does that look like in different situations for you as a coach, as a leader? And how do we get our clients into the space of self-awareness and self-regulation, and also developing empathy for yourself and for those around you? And what does that look like? We all have that, but I would say it's a lot like a muscle. And then finally, how can you communicate that and model that better to those around you, with your, which we might call social skills, but for a leader, that's your ability to communicate and model that for those around you. How can you help people become more emotionally aware around you too?
Yeah.
So I would say we want to go into that, but for me, that was sort of like, as I could look at it, those two stories really hit me, as I need to become aware of myself and move forward in a direction that serves me and those around me.
And that's a lot of the four things that you just mentioned, Faisal. That's a big plate to serve in one podcast. And so understand, as you're listening to us, we're not going to do a deep dive into all of these things because there is so much to unpack. But I do think, and I love where you started, Faisal, in that you are talking about you becoming more emotionally aware and more emotionally intelligent. The story you shared, first of all, I think demonstrates the power that somebody else in a role of authority or a role of influence can have over us in demonstrating it's okay. And this is what it could look like. Because now as coaches, we have that role of influence. We have that role of perceived authority that we've been given by our clients. And how are we going to own that? How are we going to respond in our relationship with our clients in a way that leads the way and demonstrates what is okay and how to embrace and accept all parts of us, which include the highly emotional, sometimes erratic and illogical part of us that is by definition part of humanity.
Yeah, and by the way, in that story with Brandon Burchard, the funny thing is the what shattered my reality in that moment is when I looked back, I noticed about most of the room was feeling exactly what Brendan was feeling, and they were reflecting it back And I was feeling the same thing. I was just in denial. I'm like, no, that shouldn't be the case. And I was like what? This is what I've assumed somebody like, and of course, a powerful leader who's leading a room of 750 people of 47 countries from around the world. How is he able to do that if he's not a good leader?
Yeah. 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 I love that. Daniel, tell us about a time that you cried with a client.
Oh man, I've had a lot of like I tend to cry less than my clients cry, I would say, in sessions. But my clients do cry. I had a new client come on board in the last few months, and we've been covering some pretty deep things about. I mean, it's all related to their own emotional awareness, but hearing them go through their experiences and hearing them tear up about the things that they're learning about themselves, and sometimes a client, in this case it was an example, but there's been other cases where somebody realizes something about themselves and then they have like intense regret over things that have happened in the past that they're just now becoming aware of. And part of the shift for the clients in those times are, number one, acknowledging and feeling that and letting that emotion come out, because there's some real depth to wanting to be better than we have been, or to wanting to be a good person, and to wanting to always be better than, maybe reaching our potential of who we can be in those moments. And so when we miss the mark over a long period of time, it can be pretty devastating psychologically, and simultaneously, part of the awareness is also learning that we didn't know much better back then, right? We can give ourselves a little grace too. It's okay to be disappointed and realize that that's not how we want to be, but that's a great thing to know. And so sometimes you go through that journey, you cry about like that like that's not what I wanted. And then you learn and you grow through that experience of reflecting on it. And that allows you to set up who you do want to be, and allows you to give yourself some grace. Like, none of us are perfect. And oftentimes we don't even know what we don't know. And that's the journey of emotional awareness, is learning things about ourselves and about other people that we weren't aware. It's like this expansion of awareness constantly. And it's as Faisal said, you don't one day be like, yeah, I've got my emotional awareness, I'm done. No, it's a constant, forever journey. And so sometimes when my clients do that, I mean, I teared up multiple times with this one client that I'm talking about, because I'm feeling them feel those things. And I'll be honest, like, my journey to emotional intelligence has been rocky, because I, for most of my life, had suppressed all emotions. And for better or for worse, I think it was some kind of protection mechanism, perhaps, but at the end of the day, I didn't think emotions were okay to display. And I remember knowing that it wasn't cool, because I remember this one time when I was a kid, and it was a party at my house, and I was really upset about something. I went into my room and started crying. I bawled my eyes out in my room. Didn't want people to see that, because I knew it wasn't okay for some reason. I don't know why I knew that, or I felt it wasn't okay. And then I came out and pretended to be all smiles. I remember this like one vivid memory, and like I was overcompensating. I remember doing this. It must have been so obvious, but I learned at a very young age that emotions are not okay. When in fact, that's, now I had to unlearn that my whole life, right? And so when you get to a certain point where no emotions can only take you so far, like you can only be a robot for so long before like life starts to be affected by it more than you realize. Then you have to do the work of getting in touch with your own emotions, which is really hard at that stage in life. And it took a combination of therapy and coaching and personal development for me to come to realize how valuable my emotions were. And still today, I have these tendencies of emotional suppression. I have to catch myself and allow myself to feel. And even that is hard sometimes. So, I do what I love when my clients cry is it also helps me, gives me permission to loosen those patterns. And when I find myself crying, which I know it's in there because sometimes it does come out, sometimes in sessions, but there's a couple movies that make me cry. So it's in there. But I want to also remind people, like, your ability to cry does not mean equal to your ability to have emotions, right? Like, and emotional intelligence develops from your ability to recognize and process your own emotions. It looks different for everybody. So I don't have to cry to have deep emotions, although sometimes I can tell it's a deep emotion because I'm crying. But my therapist pointed this out, like, just because you're not crying doesn't mean you're not feeling stuff, and you can be aware of those feelings and just not have to express it in that way.
Yeah.
You remind me of this. We watched a movie the other day. It was Captain Marvel with the kids, and there's one of the characters in the thing is, and he always has a serious face, and the other character is like, you should try smiling once in a while, and he looks at him like, I smile on the inside.
How did I remind you of that just now? Like I'm
I
really
don't know. It just
why?
no, and I agree. You can have a lot of emotions
Oh
inside,
yeah,
but
yeah, I
might
got
not express it in the same way that another person might.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, we express differently. And that's part of emotional intelligence, I would say, like self-awareness of my own emotions and self-regulation, being able to handle my emotions and process them in a healthy way. But also like gaining empathy for other people who may be expressing emotions differently than I do.
Yeah. So I for me in my journey and how that's looked with clients has been a little bit interesting because as I'm as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing for I suppose a decade at least in my journey of me becoming more aware of and able to regulate my emotions, I had this belief that the only way that I could show emotions is if I was able to control the emotions at the time. So, so I owned a business, a brick and mortar business, and I think at the height I had about 16 or 17 employees. And every Thursday morning we would have staff meeting and I would lead it. And this is probably one of the activities that has grown me the most as a leader is how I conducted myself in these meetings and how I planned for them and the intentionality and the culture and all of that sort of thing. I remember there would be plenty of times where I was crying. We're in this room and I had couches all around. It was a group therapy room too. And so we're all sitting on these couches. And like I'm trying to facilitate this meeting. And I had a lot of intense emotions as an entrepreneur and as trying to grow a small business and the challenges and all of that sort of thing. And so sometimes I just would come out and crying. And I remember being so frustrated with myself at times because I remember thinking crying right now is not functional. Like it's just not, there's not a leadership purpose to this, or the lens that I had is like there's not a specific function to it right now. It's actually getting in the way of my plan. But there would be other times where I'm like probably thinking inside like, yes, I'm going to let myself cry right now. I'm going to let this happen because it demonstrates my passion and my concern, whatever. And and I just think back on that. And I have two minds about it. One is, I mean, it's in the journey of emotional intelligence. So my awareness was there. My self-regulation maybe wasn't as well as it could be. But at the same time, do I really want to regulate what is genuinely happening? And just as a follow-up to that, I was part of a mastermind last Monday. Like, so it was about what, 9 days ago. And every other person in this mastermind, this business entrepreneurial mastermind, we were in person, are men, and I'm the only girl. I'm the only female. And we're talking about like what's our problem. We're going around the room, and then we're like sharing, and then we're problem solving. That's the structure of this. And I get to me, and I'm like, "What's my problem?" And I share it. And the problem itself was not emotional, but I started crying. And it was really because I had a stressful morning at home. And it was just like, I just had this emotional buildup that was so unrelated to what was happening. And so like, I just started to tear up. And I remember commenting, I'm like, I kind of was excusing myself. I'm like, sorry, I'm crying. I apologize. Because I just didn't fit the room at the moment. At least that's the way it felt. And so I'm like, I've had a hard morning. It's been pretty stressful. I'm like working on recovering from that. Um, and so I'm just reflecting even on that moment that like it was not it the strong emotions that came out. Um, there was self-awareness. I'm sure it created a layer of empathy from them, from the gentleman. But it's a complex thing, which I could keep on going down like the rabbit hole of perception with genders and emotional regulation and things like that. So I'm just going to stop, but I just
Carrie,
wanted to
I
share some of
I
these
wanna
things.
reflect
And
something you just brought to me. Like I was like feeling you in that moment. I was like, yeah, I kind of envy a little bit your ability to be so connected to your emotions that it can come out like that. Like maybe it wasn't like strategically perfect for that meeting, but at the same time, like that's exactly the thing that I've been working on for myself, allowing that to come forth. And I think I'm on the other side where it's like, even if I wanted to come forth, it might hesitate. But you're on
Mm,
this side where if you're maybe not necessarily intending for it to come out, it does come out. Like I'd
yeah.
rather be a little bit farther on your side. So like I would have loved to have been in that meeting with you as one of those guys, because then I'm like, oh, like that's kind of modeling for me and opening up my emotions. So like you
Yeah.
never know who in that meeting needed to a little release through your release, you know?
Right?
I think like I think that's really positive in some ways. And also you did a good job of acknowledging it as and this is the thing that really also gave me a light bulb, which is when people are crying or people are expressing emotions, a lot of the time has nothing to do with the thing you think it has something to do with. It could be completely unrelated. So I think that's a really valuable point you just raised. Also,
Yeah.
so
And
thank you
it's
for sharing
also a really good segue to understand that there, I mean, at least with my clients, most clients that I work with, they have a challenge with emotions. They have a huge in on both sides, on the side of regulating and their perception of it, their beliefs around emotion, but also regulation of emotion. And then on the other side of how to make sense of and process other people's emotions around, and especially the people closest to them, their husband, wife, kids, business partners, team members. It becomes friends, family members. It becomes really complex and challenging, and it all starts with what their perception of it, what their belief is. And usually, people have strong beliefs, just like people have strong beliefs around money. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, the root of all evil, and emotions are get associated with, oh, well, a woman is supposed to express emotion this way, a man is. They're kind of guidelines we've all been brought up with that we don't. Uh, it worked at a certain time and context standpoint, but maybe it stopped working at this point, and we've carried them on generationally. And at this point, we don't know what our beliefs are, so we're carrying automatic beliefs a lot of times. So a lot of times when I'm working with clients, and this is why it's so important, especially that first call that you have with a client, is to understand their perception of their life. And usually their perception of the people around them and how they respond and react to them is connected to emotions there.
Mhm.
And that's where actually really important pieces that they're not even aware of it will come up, will
Yeah.
emerge, that they have weird beliefs around expressing themselves, not expressing themselves, reacting to people's emotions in ways that has nothing to do with them, comes up, which will be complete blind spots and will be ways for you to help move the client forward. So
Can you give a quick
the
example, Faisal, just for our benefit of our viewers?
yes,
Like I
yes.
understand what you're saying, but I think it would be helpful to have something specific to relate that to.
Sure. I can go to an examples. For example, I have a client right now who's actually going, I'm working with both husband and wife right now. And they're going through a tough period right now. And one of the things that has come up is, I mean, it's very interesting. This is not the first couple that this has happened. A couple who's been together for 20 plus years, they haven't had major conflicts. And to me, that's a little bit surprising. And until this blow up happened, and I won't go into the details of it, but when this happened, neither of them knew how to react to each other emotionally. And it was a little bit odd because before that, the way they portrayed their life was that they're friends with each other, they're calm, they're collected. But the sense that I kept getting when this blow up happened was that it was a breach of trust when this happened. They didn't know how to react to each other. And in fact, what I realized in the process as I got got more input from them was, and they realized the same thing, is that they weren't as close as they thought they were. And part of the reason why they weren't that close is because they never dealt with conflicts in the way that they are dealing with, and they had no idea how to deal with it after 20 plus years of being in a marriage. So the whole process of working with them required me to kind of move away from the conflict right now and like, okay, what is happening? It's like I feel like I'm acting like a child. I don't know why I'm acting like that. So all of a sudden there's a part of him that's emerging that they never allowed to emerge for 20 years of their probably 40, 50 years of their life, but 20 years of their marriage at least. So now we're having to work through that whole process and bring out beliefs that was not theirs. to the point where I felt like I wasn't even qualified to work through some of this stuff. So I had to bring in another coach who could work on their nervous system a little bit more. So this whole conflict that came up in their marriage allowed them to make sense of how their perception of their emotions in the context of their marriage is. And it's actually, even though they're going through a rough time, this is actually bringing them closer after they went through this challenging period in their marriage. And what I'm trying to share here is that it doesn't matter if it's like in the context of marriage or in a business partnership or something else. And I'll give one other example. I have another client. This was last year, I think. He went through a really bad partnership where he became partners with a close friend who he had known for close to 20-something years. And what ended up happening was that this friend actually betrayed him in the process and hid information, and he vouched for him with his whole team in the investing side. And when this whole thing broke apart, I didn't see him for a couple of weeks. In fact, he didn't even show up to the session because he's like, I need to recollect myself. Then I saw him after a couple of weeks. And as I was talking to him, he's like, yeah, I dealt with it. It was really hard and intense for a couple of days, but I think I've processed it. And I just wanted to check in a little bit. Can you share a little bit about it? What has happened? I know it was tough. And I could tell he was holding back. So I had to walk him through a whole process to go through it. So basically the process, what it looks like is and it's a very simple process in therapy that's used. It's also used in coaching models where you get them to connect with whatever they're feeling at the surface, which is usually anger in that case, and then go one step deeper. You assign a color and a shape to it. You go one step deeper. What is the one after that? In that case, if I remember correctly, it was after that it was frustration. After that it was hurt, pain, and as you kept going down the layers, it was actually just them feeling hurt. And the client just broke down in that moment, and it took him another 2 weeks to actually process that. Now, had he not gone through a session like that, he would have probably carried that emotion and the effects of it with other relationships for probably the next 2, 3, 5 years, 10 years, if not longer. So for me, I'm looking for people's beliefs, especially their perception, then beliefs within those perception, and their reaction to different contexts in their life. And that actually really helps you understand where they are in their emotional intelligence, but more importantly, helps them understand and how you can work with them to move forward. I don't know, was that clear?
Yeah, that was awesome. That was awesome, Faisal. I really appreciate you sharing that story. Good examples of how people's beliefs and sometimes their subconscious and people's emotions are interrelated.
Absolutely. One of the things that came to mind as I was listening to your story, Faisal, is it's a term that we use in the psychology therapy world called triangulation. And basically what triangulation is when particularly if you're working with two people, a couple, that's kind of where my mind went when you were talking about working with that couple. But this kind of dynamic still can happen when you're just working with one person. And it's basically where you get sucked into the viewpoint emotionally. You become more emotionally aligned with one person than the other, which is can be a dangerous place to be in, especially if you're working with a couple, to become more aligned with one than the other, because then the other feels ostracized. They feel like you're not supporting them. There's a whole thing there.
I've had heard enough stories of therapists working with clients, and the reason why they left therapy is because one person felt like they were taking sides with the other one.
Absolutely. So there's this whole intentionality that I bring to working with couples, and maybe that's maybe this could be another podcast.
Yes,
but
there's a lot.
With emotional intelligence, if you as a coach are very in tune with what you believe, how you're feeling about what the stories that you're hearing, because inevitably I think back on working with couples, and there have been plenty of times where I'm listening to the two sides, and my natural inclination is to side with one of them, to be like, oh, I could totally be like, oh yeah, they are totally in the wrong. And if I'm not aware that I could have this tendency to align because of my own life experiences, because of my own beliefs, then that's going to take coaching in a very ineffective way. And so the emotional intelligence of the coach and being aware of my own values, how that aligns or doesn't align with the clients so that I can keep separate that misalignment and best serve the client and where they need and to help resolve their issues instead of me emotionally getting pulled into their issues because maybe I have similar challenges in my marriage or whatever the scenario is. Like, I think this is a really good demonstration of the importance of us becoming, in the journey of never stopping our own emotional awareness, regulation, ability to empathize with other people and ourselves, and our ability to interact well, given all of that, because that's, I mean, how are we going to help other people when we're a jumbled mess and we can't even sort through our own things, and separate us from them? So I think I love that you use that example as with a couple, because I think that highlights a lot of this.
You're reminding me, and we should totally do a podcast on coaching couples for sure, or relationships. And I remember one way that I developed a lot of emotional intelligence in my process as a coach was I had a client who came to me and they had various things they were working on and they had major issues in their relationship. And so we coached for a while, and then we realized that the other person might also benefit from coaching. And so, with their permission, I had a session with that person, and they thought that that was going to be a good idea too. And so, before we entered into coaching each of them separately, which is what ended up happening, I had them both agree ahead of time that, like, hey, we may talk about what apparently are contradictory things in sessions, and I have to follow that narrow line. Like, in my session with you, I'm going to talk about what's good for you and what is beneficial to you. In my session with you, I'm going to talk about what's good for you and what's beneficial to you. But I have biases. I'm not going to be perfect at it. I will keep that confidentiality between them, which is really hard to do. I almost didn't do it because I was like, I don't know if I can do this. But I did eventually figure out a way to do it. And I wrote a little letter to them saying, like, here's how I'm going to approach this. And if you share something with me, it's not going to go to the other person. And if this person decides to do something that feels right to them, that might actually not interact really well with what this person's deciding, I can't really do anything about that. You guys are your own people. At the same time, like, I can still intelligently help guide people to things that are going to be helpful, knowing something, but not specifics to bring into that case with the other person. And so I ended up saying, I also, want to disclose, I have a bias towards the relationship, a slight bias towards the relationship, because you came with me together. And if you decide not to stay together, that's fine. If you decide to stay together, that's fine. My slight bias is trying to make it work if it's gonna be possible to make it work because of the specifics of their situation. And that was really hard. But navigating that, taking the time to think through what I'm going to write to them and having them agree ahead of time, and then going through the process with both sides separately, was really challenging. And
Yeah.
it forced me to get that higher level of emotional awareness, because I took it really seriously. I was like, oh my gosh, I really can't afford to let these biases in. I'm sure I did, but not as much as I would have without those intentions, those agreements ahead of time. And so you can also, like, grow by your own emotional intelligence by navigating really challenging situations, which has been the case across my whole life, not just that as a coach, but like, it's the most challenging situations in life that have made me more emotionally aware. Like the passing away of my best friend, it was a suicide. And so, like, those are the kinds of experiences that they're not fun to go through at all, but they, on the other side of those things, it really develop you emotionally. And so, like, all those challenges you have in life, and I think of that this way today, when I really encounter a hard situation, like, initial reaction is like, oh, this is hard. But then I realize, like, this is actually part of my emotional development. This is what's going to make me a better coach. Like, the hardest thing recently has been having a newborn and going through the process of, like, having less sleep and having more chaos, and, like, figuring out what to do with my toddler and my newborn and my wife and our relationship and our house. And, do we even care about, like, hygiene anymore? It's like, there's so many pieces of this. Do we even care about sleep anymore? It's like, and, like, you're so stressed out. But, like, I'm reminding myself every day that this is actually part of my emotional development. Being able to, like, handle this more intense situations than I've ever had when it comes to family, the implications of all that, and then realizing that for me, it's actually making me a better person and a better coach. And, like, that's emotional intelligence at work in development into what I'm capable of. So,
Which is to say that what we're also trying to communicate is that you need to do your part. Like, part of it is you will be faced with circumstances in life to deal with, But part of it is you're going to need to challenge yourself to put yourself in circumstances. And a lot of growth and development is actually emotional resilience that you build up.
That's right.
And there's this, I think, I don't know if it's a quote or an idea, that life doesn't get easier, you just become more resilient. In fact, life actually, when you look
Yeah,
at
I
it,
love
it gets
that.
more complex, especially as you have I mean, the natural development of a human being as you build your own family, your own community, your own team, all that, it increases complexity. It doesn't decrease complexity. And that's actually from a client's perspective. Whenever I'm looking at client, I'm looking towards, people forget choices that they make, like, very easily. And we make a choice to jump into the relation, but we forget that it comes with all the things, the good and the bad. I made a choice to create chaos in my life for the next 2 months. I have to constantly remind myself, I made this choice. So the good and the bad is going to come with it. It comes with the two sides. So it helps a lot when you go through these things and you've processed it in that way, to ask better questions from clients. Do they actually see it as a choice? How do they perceive it? How do they look at it? And there's one other area, this whole thing that we're talking about is also a leadership skill. Like, without this piece, it's very, very hard to lead people. And there's this, one of my favorite physicists, Richard Feynman's quote. He said that if I will paraphrase it, if electrons had emotions, I'd be out of a job. So like, this is how it's same thing. Einstein had a hard time with stock markets because it required him to make sense of the complexity of human emotions, and he couldn't. Is like, that's not my world. It's much easier to figure out the world of physics because it's standard, there are patterns there, but human patterns are very complex. And that's the world that we operate in, our own world that's very complex, but in clients' world. And one last thing in there, and this actually came up in our Monday sessions, and one of our members asked this question, is how do I go deeper with emotions? We're going to have that conversation soon. What we came to, the conclusion we came to, is don't assume anything. Check in with clients. And that's the whole process of discovery, is to check in with every aspect of this tedious. When you check in, you notice things, and they notice things that they've never noticed. I won't go deep into it, but just at least those elements, keeping in mind for ourselves and for our clients, makes a big difference.
Make me want to have a podcast about physics and coaching.
All right. Any last parting words as we wrap this up, gentlemen?
I would just say, I love combining what Faisal said with what everybody else was saying, what he said just now, which is like, in your life, emotional intelligence comes from challenging experiences and being able to go through them, process them, or rise up to them. And so in every situation, you can remind yourself, like, I'm developing emotional intelligence. This is part of what's making me the person I'm going to become. And so how do I want to show up given that? And there's things that you choose in life, and there's also things that you apparently didn't choose that you may be still contributing to. And there's things that you don't necessarily choose at all, but you can still rise up in those situations too. So that's my little takeaway here. How about you?
Absolutely. And it's this is going to sound weird, but I'm going to say it anyway. For whatever reason, I was thinking about this in the shower this morning. After I came back from the gym, it was this analogy that when we go to the gym, we work hard. There's a little bit of pain. And when we get home, there's more pain, stiffness, aching. And we look at it, and our interpretation is the pain is okay because we know it's growing us. And yet when we look at the same thing about going through hard situations in life that have emotional pain afterwards, we often interpret that not as it's okay because that's part of the growth process. We look at it and say, well, it shouldn't be. Therefore, now I'm not going to do the thing that caused the pain. Now I'm not going to go back to the gym. So we look at it one way with gym and our physical health, but we tend to interpret it differently emotionally. So if we could treat our emotional life with some of the same perspective that we treat our physical health, I think that could be valuable. And I don't know why that hit me in the shower, but it did.
That was amazing, Sherry. That was so good. That was so good.
And you also explain why it's hard for most people to be entrepreneurs, because I think more than anything, it takes emotional resilience to be entrepreneurs. You described your early journey as like, there is going to be like this that you need to adjust to. Absolutely. And know that you need to be okay with that instability and the process of what you're going through. And once you become okay with that, actually businesses, I have a favorite saying with one of my clients, it's just business.
Yeah.
It's just that's the normal part of what you're doing. But in the first 2 years, it's very unusual for anybody to come in because it's a lot of chaos and instability internally.
So we can pretty well predict that if you're a coach and you're listening to this, you've probably got some pain in your business, some instability that you're still struggling with. I know I do. My business is not a perfectly even flow. I have challenges, stresses. And so if that's you and you're working on growing your business, you're working on scaling your business, because really no matter if you've been doing this for a month or 10 years, you're going to be trying to level up to the next level, whatever that is for you. And you're going to find that there's going to be challenges and that craziness. And so the Coaching Mastery community, which is the sponsor for this podcast, we have support that is directly and specifically going to support and help you through that process to develop the systems that you need to level up, to develop the community around you of other amazing coaches that are doing things that you can tap into, that energy, that enthusiasm, that inspiration, and those strategies that are working now. And so we encourage you to consider joining a community that's going to give you all the support you need right now. And the best way to jump in is we just launched our school community. We've been on Facebook for years. But we're transitioning to school because we see it as a better, more effective platform for serving our community. So if this sounds like something that you're like, sign me up, go to cmc.coach/ Daniel, which one? Because I screw it up every time.
/
/ I will remember that. /school. And school is not spelled like your kid's school. It's spelled SKOOL. And we would love to see you over there. There is a small membership, monthly membership fee for the value you get. It's entirely insignificant. So come on over, take a look at what we're doing, and we would love to see you on that side and be able to be in community with you and serve you.
Awesome. And we'll put the link below too in the description. Until our next conversation, hope you have an incredible week. Bye.
Bye.